Seven Deadly Sins isn't an incredibly popular verse to scale to begin with, but comparatively the sins themselves are the most popular characters for a ranking video or to scale to begin with. But today I'll be ranking another one of the most popular groups in the series, and the one that's the least clear to rank out of the main ones, especially in comparison to the very clear Archangels or Four Knights of the Apocalypse. I'll be ranking them based on overall performance and capabilities, and the commandments that I'll be specifically using are the ones released by the Seal, accompanied by Fraudrin, both of them being the ones that we have the most knowledge on, as well as being the primary ones that we see. I'll be taking them all at their peaks, although they have to be mentally similar enough to normal to actually be considered, so no 2 or more commandments Restarosa or using Mael, even though it doesn't really change my ranking, and no chaos forms from Melascula or Galand. In 10th place, Grey Road takes the cake for weeks of the commandments. With a lack of good showings, be it for combat-oriented abilities or physical stats, Grey Road can only even hope for a stalemate against any even really commandment-level fighter, as they aren't allowed to kill her, but on the same note, she isn't allowed to kill either. And what doesn't help is essentially half the characters in the later part of the series having either immunity to the commandments or just ignoring it, or in the commandments case, they simply aren't affected by commandments other than their own. 9th place is going to Melascula, the Commandment of Faith. She's not particularly impressive in any real metric other than a sealing ability, as her physical stats are incredibly lacking, and she needs to have a solid opening to even use her soul abilities, and even that can backfire as seen with Escanor's soul on its own, scorching her entire being with just a touch. Her Cocoon of Darkness is iffy at best, as it is plenty strong for her level of fighter, but angel abilities can break it, canceling abilities should theoretically be able to, and it was immediately completely eviscerated by Assault Mode Meliodas even existing. It was probably stronger than anyone on this list. The higher characters should be able to do it at least something compared to it with a named powerful attack. At 8th place rested Derriere, the Commandment of Purity. Now some may think she's a little low on this list, but I disagree, as much as I appreciate her character. She has pretty decent physicals, but that's all she really has going for her. Her regeneration isn't anything impressive compared to the others on this list, and her only real relevant ability is to multiply her damage with each hit in a combo string. But even at over 50 hits, she can only even break the arms of Base Awakened Meliodas, who isn't even stronger than the stronger members on this list. So her strongest peak we've seen is only capable of breaking a few bones of higher members on this list, at best, and that's all she has going for her. There's no real way I could put her higher. At 7, I have Droll, the Commandment of Patience and the King of the Giants. Based off physicals alone, he isn't beating Derriere. Both Droll's dance and heavy metal, I don't think she could really compare to that in a direct fight or overall. He can react to a Base Awakened Meliodas pretty easily even after just getting hit with Escanor's Sun, which left him on the floor, so his speed is at least on Derriere's level, and could casually tank Awakened Meliodas' barrage of physical attacks, with a slash from Lost Vein being the only attack to phase him to that point, and this is without heavy metal. He can create 16-mile wide mazes that have insane regeneration, even traps with exotic creatures, and create even more giant constructs afterwards. With heavy metal, he easily tanks Awakened Meliodas, Demon Mark, Divine Slayer, and can knock back the same Meliodas. At number 6, I have Fraudrin, the Commandment of Selflessness. Revive Meliodas' clone is implied to be as strong as Awakened State's base, seeing as they pretty much share a power level and nobody aside from Merlin seems to recognize that it's a clone, with Fraudrin being implied slightly above this clone before getting absolutely humiliated by Demon Mark Revived Meliodas. That's not even really an anti-feat. That's really all there is to scale Fraudrin for the most part, aside from his self-destruct, which would have leveled Lioness, presumably similar to what Meliodas did to Danafor. At number 5, it may be a hot take, but I have Galand, the Sin of Truth. Galand was a massive threat even before he got his full power back, completely blitzing literal teleportation by traveling multiple kilometers in seemingly no time at all, and being considered by Merlin to hopelessly outmatch herself and the rest of the people there, which include the just annihilated pre-awakening Demon Mark II Meliodas. With Critical over, he far exceeds even this though, as his overall capabilities skyrocket to a level implied to be enough to beat Base Awakened Meliodas. Granted, I disagree with the power levels being an end-all be-all, but Galand should be considered this strong seeing as he could cut into Escanor, who Meliodas still considers stronger than himself at this point, while being previously unable to even touch Awakened Meliodas in base, although tanking his barrage of attacks. Galand is also able to statue damn near anyone just by them lying in his vicinity. Galand being mostly reliant on physical strength, alongside his physical feats I've mentioned, should be implicative enough for him to be considered one of the stronger commandments strength-wise, and his commandment is a decent enough ability on its own. His regeneration has some decent showings as well in comparison to some others here, as he can regenerate it from being completely split down the middle, being cut in half, and more. Number 4 is Gloxinia, the Fairy King, and Commandment of Repose. He can dodge Demon Mark Awakened Meliodas attacks, making him definitely faster than base Galand, and arguably faster than Critical Over, taking multiple hits without his armor from this same Meliodas. With his Ydra armor, he can swat aside Awakened Meliodas, although it didn't survive long against Demon Mark Awakened Meliodas slashes. Again, not exactly an anti-V, as this would incinerate everyone below him on this list. His healing ability can heal even wounds caused by Meliodas Hellblaze, which is insane considering not even Bond's Regeneration is capable of that, as well as healing Malaskiel's burns from Escanor's soul. Gloxinia should also just upscale from all of King's feats before awakening his adult form. At number 3, I have Monspeet, the Commandment of Reticence. Monspeet is very underrated by most of the community, even though I do think he's top 3 commandments, both in physicals and overall abilities, and really anything. He's physically strong enough to restrain Estarossa, and can straight up tank the Omega Arc from Tarmiel and Sariel. He's casually fast enough to dodge attacks from Estarossa, and can no-sell his full-power Hellblaze, even being considered the strongest Hellblaze user in the Demon Realm, which would only exclude Meliodas himself. He has extraordinary range, being able to sense and launch attacks appeal from hundreds of miles away, with effectively aimbot as it tracks the target, and with barely any magic power, his attack was going to wipe out the entire group aside from Deanne that Galand fought, which would imply him barely using any magic is superior to Galand's base strength without Critical Over. He was about to kill Estarossa without Dariari interrupting it, so I honestly would not mind if you had him above Estarossa here. Alas, we have reached number 2. For any who have gotten this far, you likely knew the top 2 from the get-go. Number 2 is going to be Estarossa, the Commandment of Love. He can smack around and tank hits from Sunshine Escanor, also scaling him in speed, as well as tank Cruel Sun with Pride Flare and Escanor's Heat at point-blank range, regenerating from Pride Flare in seconds with no signs of damage. He's pretty much bodying Escanor before, where many people get it mixed up on base Sunshine Escanor supposedly one-shotting him, but that isn't the case. As noon approaches, Escanor rises in power. We have both a statement implying the time nearing noon, and a statement saying Escanor got stronger right before using Cruel Sun. So no, base Sunshine Escanor did not one-shot Estarossa. It's more like his bigger form prior to the one that he uses against Assault Mode in Zeldris, which is consistent with him being a complete fucking giant after this statement as well. Estarossa is stated to be on the level of Zeldris in abilities by Cusack, but I don't really think this is consistent for actual various abilities, and instead interpret this as actual physical ability. In fact, I'd argue Estarossa surpasses Zeldris in just normal, raw physical strength. All of this is inferior to pretty much all other aspects that Zeldris has. Estarossa and Zeldris show similar speed when they go to attack Assault Mode Meliodas, but later on Zeldris just shows much better feats, and as such, I don't think this is consistent at all. It is more of a retcon since the earlier statement for Estarossa being equal to Zeldris is from the same chain of events. At number 1 is Zeldris, the Commandment of Piety and the Demon King's Executioner. And warning for any still watching, from here on out I'll take the liberty of scaling Zeldris in full, as I haven't seen a full and comprehensive scale for Zeldris really ever, and I wish to deliver on that as many seem to downplay just how strong he is. And as far as the commandments go, I even go as far as to say he could solo this entire list at once, and could beat Mael in a fair one-on-one. Starting with Zeldris' attack bonus, he's casually capable of slicing off Demon Mark Awakened Meliodas' arm, harming Ludoshel, pushing against the one Escanor for nearly the full minute, not allowing Escanor to bypass his guard until Divine Spear was employed while Zeldris was jumping back. Escanor showing clear struggle with this and Zeldris scratching his arm. He could afterwards counter and block Awakened King's true Spirit Spear, and go on to go toe-to-toe with the near-noon Mael, and this is where the controversy starts. Yes, Zeldris is above Mael pretty easily. A fatigued Zeldris was able to match Mael blow for blow, and when Zeldris finally collapsed from exhaustion, Mael was heavily weakened as well. And this is a fresh off of noon Mael, so he's just about at the peak of his power aside from the one, while Zeldris is heavily fatigued and doesn't even have his commandment, which would be a pretty decent buff, considering each commandment contains 5% of the Demon King's power, and being very generous to Zeldris, he's 50% of that at best. So that's at the absolute bare minimum, a 10% boost, which may not seem like much with flashy multipliers going about, but 10% over someone who's at best relative to you beforehand is absolutely relevant and a factor to consider. Hell, 50% isn't even that much of a stretch, as Zeldris could hold off the Demon King, again without his commandment, very well in the Mindscape, with attacks being stated to surpass even the likes of Meliodas, who at this point is a permanent assault mode. I don't think it's at all unfair to have Zeldris this high, considering you also watch my video on Assault Mode Meliodas versus Escanor to see how high I scale Assault Mode Meliodas. With an Ominous Nebula on top of this, Zeldris becomes an absolute beast, immediately bodying Ludoshel and a pre-noon Escanor, making any of their attacks utterly useless, immediately kicking the Demon King out of his body right after a statement saying he would beat him, and he was going to do a level of damage to Mael if his sword hadn't melted. So Zeldris is an absolute beast in attack potency, but how does he stack up in other categories? In durability and endurance, he's also an underrated monster with feats of tanking the same cruel sun that put Estarossa into a coma, multiple attacks from an awakened demon marked Meliodas, a blast from Merlin that was knocking away Chandler and Cusack, a gold shining from Ludoshel immediately after almost instantly recovering from Divine Spear, tanking multiple attacks from a near-noon Mael, including Helios Fair, and an attack from the Demon King himself later on. He also tanks Excalibur, Arthur's attack similarly to Meliodas did, while also taking a more direct shot, although both took 0 damage. He, as mentioned before, endured the Divine Spear and then proceeded to battle even more before nearly stalemating the near-peak Mael. Now, as mentioned before in Estarossa's section, he can be interpreted to have physical strength superior to that of Zeldris, but I believe that to be primarily in raw strength or even just lifting strength, as Zeldris' showings just far outclass Estarossa's, which could also just be a result of a significantly better magic reinforcement, but as a whole, Zeldris isn't really limited by this statement due to how loose and inconsistent it is. Zeldris' speed is also, again, easily top tier, still without his commandment. Zeldris is capable of going relative with Ludoshel in speed, even requiring Escanor to make an opening for Ludoshel to use Gold Shining. And while many may try to say that Ludoshel landed one more attack than Zeldris having literally no acknowledgement towards it and immediately regenerating seems to be more indicative of him simply not caring enough. He's also capable of going toe-to-toe with Mael, speed-wise of course, as well as dodge and land attacks on the Demon King, as well as both block and evade Divine Sword from the one Escanor. He also blitzes the shit out of Demon Mark Awakened Meliodas, so that's a solid feat as far as this list goes. With full react, he's easily top 5 in the verse speed-wise pre-Forkoa, and that's including Chaos characters, as he could blitz the shit out of Escanor, Ludoshel, the Demon King, and was likely going to with Mael, and against the former two he was going half power at most, seeing as once he actually started trying, he stayed to have his Ominous Nebula double in power. When he went all out, he was so fast that it outpaced Merlin's teleportation, and the only way that they could counter it was with their strongest possible ally on the field, at that point just having to walk through it, not even dodge or react to it. And similarly to such, full react has stayed so fast that it's completely impossible to avoid, and Ludoshel implies that it's a completely new tier of speed. So Zeldris is an absolute beast in speed, and easily near the complete pinnacle of the speed in series, only being beaten out by characters that should absolutely fold him in other metrics. As far as hacks goes, he has all of Meliodas' physiological abilities, such as regeneration, flight, or purgatory flames, although he'd been inferior to Hellblaze to someone like Mon Speed, of course, due to direct statements. He obviously has Ominous Nebula, which has attraction and repulsion effects. With the Ruler, he immediately reverses any magic attack that he's hit with, for instance an attack meant to harm will instead heal. There is a limit to the Ruler, though, which Broku can't seem to figure out, as darkness is indeed not magic. The Ruler blatantly can't reverse it, in which the Ruler reverses all magic in general. You get that darkness equals magic bullshit out of my face. Zeldris' commandment allows him to essentially control anyone who attempts to run away from him. It should be included in this list of demonic abilities he shares with Meliodas, as all demons seemingly have it, but he can also manipulate souls and rip them out of their bodies. In conclusion, the 10 Commandments vary from being pretty much fodder to god tiers, with Zeldris being an incredibly strong character that doesn't get enough credit. This list was relatively clear to me from the get-go, but I see most rankings I simply disagree with, so I thought I might as well have my go at it. Any disagreements are welcome in the comments, and I hope you all enjoyed. See you and have a great rest of your day.